Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape Podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Okay, so today we'll learn about the Wyoming Taxpayers Association and get some reflections on the 2024 legislative session, as well as future directions for the organization. Today we'll also learn more about the Cowboy Family Report recently unveiled by the Wyoming Taxpayers Association, including the interactive dashboard. So Ashley and Dawson, thank you so much for being here. Let's start by having you tell our listeners about your backgrounds and your roles at the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. And Dawson, I think you might have a little bit of a different role coming up. So we'll hear from both of you. Ashley, why don't you start?
Sure. So I am a UW graduate with a BS in communications and an emphasis in public relations. Do not have any CPA or tax background, but have been working in public policy and economic development, workforce development, and have always been in a role where I've been a conduit for industry. And so with Wyoming Taxpayers Association, I'm the executive director, and we just advocate for sound tax policy for a healthy Wyoming economy.
Perfect. And Ashley, remind me, your name is Ashley. Say your last name too.
Ashley Harpstreith.
Great. Thanks so much, Ashley. And Dawson, why don't you introduce yourself, starting with your name, and give us a little bit of background and any information you want to share about your future.
Sure. Yeah. So I am Dawson Kluesner. I'm currently the senior research intern for the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. I have bachelor's degrees in business economics and marketing from the University of Wyoming, and I'm currently pursuing my MBA with a concentration in energy business, also at the University of Wyoming. I've been with the WTA for 2 years now, and basically my role consists of analyzing Wyoming tax data to be used in our publications. The research in these publications ranges from state-to-state comparisons to comparisons of historical data to understanding the impact of different industries have on our state tax revenue. So, and more generally, we just create educational pieces on our state tax structure. So I also help in analyzing any potential impacts and policies that are being considered by the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. And you wanted me to talk about my future?
If you want to.
Sure.
Do you want to do it now or at the end?
We can do it now.
Okay.
So I just recently accepted a position with SER as a energy economist starting in June. So very excited for that future endeavor in my career.
We are so excited to have you. Yet another UW grad going to join us here, and you're going to be in the Center for Energy Regulation and Policy Analysis. Mm-hmm. So super excited. It's a great opportunity for us to be able to hire great minds like yours and keep you right here in Wyoming. So very excited about that.
I would also like to add, I'm excited to keep leveraging Dawson in that capacity.
Yep. We're all about collaboration here. And even though it's not really poaching because he has to he's getting to graduate. But
the bird had to fly the nest.
Mm-hmm. We look forward to continuing to work with you. So Ashley, tell our listeners a little bit about the history of the WTA and its mission.
Sure. So like I said, since 1937, WTA has advocated for sound tax policy for a healthy Wyoming economy. We are not anti-tax or pro-tax. We are just a nonprofit 501c4 corporation think tank with a 501c3 foundation research arm. Our membership is diverse, from large companies to family businesses, mineral producers to ranchers, corporations to cooperatives, elected officials to private citizens.
Perfect. Okay, Ashley, the WTA is very engaged in the legislative process. So can you talk a little bit about how you engage with the legislature throughout the year?
Sure. So we follow them from beginning to end. So we're just coming out of the traditional legislative session. They did a budget session in the even year and then a general session in the odd year. And then we'll follow all the various interim committees that are looking at tax policy. This has turned into a full-time gig, as you know, because you follow some of the committees and work very closely with the legislative committees. So we are interacting and trying to educate them constantly on a year-round basis. And when we're looking at policy, what we are very unique as opposed to the other associations is we have a litmus test, and it's our cornerstones of taxation. So we look at 4 key principles. Is the tax policy justified? Is it equitable? Is it stable? Is it transparent? We also have an exemption justification analysis that we look at when we're deciding if an exemption helps lift the base or take down the base. And then we have a fee structure analysis. We do have a spending policy. There are constitutional guidelines that line out for the legislature what they have to spend money on. And then there are things that are nice to haves. University of Wyoming is a land grant, so you are a must-have. Our community colleges are not. So the state levies to pay for our community college system through the communities that they reside in. So we do closely watch the dollar and how it's spent.
Great, thanks. And do you have any reflections? I know the last legislative session just ended, and it's been kind of a whirlwind. Do you have any early reflections on the session that's recently concluded that you'd like to share?
Sure. So there were two main issues for me that I followed. One being the budget, and they were able to successfully pass a budget, which is very exciting because that, again, is their constitutional duty. It was one of the larger budgets, but we're still on the tail end of federal dollars from ARPA and COVID relief funds that are integrated into our budget that we're trying to use the best of and not have to use our own dollars with. And then we have federal funds, of course, that come in that makes our budget look a little bit bigger. But when you're looking at just state revenues and state general services, that's about a $3 billion appropriation. And then the rest is like other funds, federal funds, a lot of dollars that you work in, is made the budget about $11 billion. I'm still shaking out of what was funded, what wasn't, because there were so many changes. This year was monumental as the joint conference committee between the two chambers that met kind of blew up or did blow up. And so they created a new budget, a joint conference committee, which had everything go. So there were no rules. And luckily, they were able to decide to go back to the original Joint Appropriations Committee budget, and then they negotiated from there. And I think they did actually ended up doing a beautiful job of really thinking through what Wyoming needed and what they wanted and what were nice to haves and what were need to haves, and provided that consistent funding for our state to work efficiently over the next 2 years. So that's always super close and something we engage pretty heavily in because there is a lot of taxpayer projects involved in the budget. The other thing that doesn't necessarily hit most of my members, but does affect the revenues of how we pay for things is residential property tax. So there was a package of bills that passed. The property tax exemption was the 4% cap, and then a homeowner's tax exemption was 25%. And then a veterans ad valorem exemption that just raised the exemption from $3,000 to $6,000 fair market value. They all lay on top of each other depending on what you qualify for. You know, obviously not everybody qualifies for the long term or the veterans. So some of them interact, some of them do not. The cap is the one that will be on forever. The others have sunsets on them. And what they were trying to get at was the excess in revenues that the residents paid in over the last couple of years that have made our residential property taxes skyrocketed. So providing some relief to those residential property taxpayers. Now, the interesting thing from Wyoming Taxpayers Association perspective is, based on the talk we just had over lunch, is how dependent we are on minerals revenues. While a lot of my large taxpayers, they don't really care in the policy of how they decide to cut the resident properties tax. They just are concerned about the shift in burden. So if they decide to keep some of these measures on permanently, my members are concerned, where are they going to make up that revenue or where are they going to cut the spending? So we followed that pretty closely. There was some special district bills that we follow. Special districts account for about $2 billion of our dollars in revenue, which a lot of people don't understand that. And so there's been a lot of special district reform that's been going on since 2015. There's over 800 special districts, and no special district is created or interacted alike. There's a lot of different rules around all of them. So any conformity or cleanup around that is super important to my members because the mills they're paying are substantial.
Yeah.
So we watched that pretty closely. We watched some energy bills. There was a tangible personal property tax that looked at eradicating tangible personal property, which a lot of energy producers pay pretty heavily into. That accounts for about $300 million per biennium. Instead, they just upped an exemption to $35,000, but then it ended up failing. I do think there'll be some cleanup around that. The way our appraisal system happens right now is we are collecting more revenue and taxing an item more than it's worth. So this is really important for our energy producers.
Right.
So that will be a topic that will be back, but we watched really closely that went down. And then there was some EOR incentives that we were watching with the 45Q credits. The legislature wasn't really understanding the value of that. So that did not make it far. So I assume that will be back. There were some regulatory issues that eventually will affect taxation, like the unitization of sequestration that were kind of on our monitor list that we were watching. So still a lot of nexus of energy policy that we watched pretty closely.
Yeah, it's interesting because unitization doesn't necessarily directly tie to taxes, but it does impact the industries that will ultimately pay taxes. Right. And I think one of the reasons we're so excited to increase our engagement with you, Ashley, and with WTA is because our mission here at the School of Energy Resources is to promote energy-driven economic development. We're looking at ways to grow revenue for the state. And it's through that tax burden that our energy and minerals and our extractive industries pay. And so as we work on new technologies and new whole industries, it's really incumbent on us to better understand how that is going to benefit the state. And so, since its inception, SCR has kind of had that concept that we need to generate more revenue. Well, now we're at the point where after we were created by legislation in 2006, but now we're at the point where we're actually launching industries. We're getting commercial scale projects. We're having commercial scale demonstrations that are moving forward. We're having community meetings about real projects. It's time we need to really do a good job understanding what these industries can mean for Wyoming, both for the projects that are here and then for projects that support our energy use outside the state. So really appreciate you walking through that and working with us here at the School of Energy Resources. So it's going to be a great collaboration. So Ashley, can you just tell us a little bit about the revenue through taxes that Wyoming's energy and extractive sector provide to the state? Maybe give us some examples or quantify a little bit.
Sure. So a general tax structure will have property tax, sales tax, and an income tax. Our tax structure is a little bit different because we have a severance tax. So property tax makes up 47% of our taxes. So property tax makes up 47% of the pie, where over 52% of that is from mineral production. General sales tax is 26%, where it's hard to quantify that with the NACE codes and modeling consumption behaviors, but I would say at least half of that could be contributed to mineral purchases when you think about how much a load truck, for example, costs and the taxes on that and their large equipment. And again, like I said, most states have an income tax, so severance tax makes up 22%, while other taxes are just 5%. So if you add 47%, half of that, so we're still close to about half of our tax revenue comes from the minerals industry. Property tax, it's safe to say over half of our property tax comes from minerals industry. And then, 30% of our total revenues when we look outside of our tax structure comes from investment incomes, which is pretty much all stock from the minerals industry.
Great.
Surpluses.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Sure.
One of the things that WTA has really worked on that's really interesting lately is the Cowboy Family Report. So Ashley, can you talk about what was the vision for that project and how does a project like this or a concept like this become a reality through WTA?
Sure. So I could not have done this without the help of my interns from the College of Business. Dawson Kluesner really was the lead on this project, but I've looked at several other models in other states where they've looked at individual taxpayers and they've leveraged it with policymakers. If I pull on this lever, how does that affect the individual taxpayer? And where it's a little bit opposite for us, and mainly states with income taxes have been messing with this. We are super fortunate in that you cannot break the model we built, that we put in about $1 and we get about $14 back in services. And so we really wanted to highlight how fortunate we are. And, we have the second lowest effective tax burden in the United States and all the rich services that we get back. Now, there's debate in what's adequate services and what's not, but this is in the current model we're in. And we wanted to highlight whether you're single, whether you have a family, whether you're retired, whatever your circumstances, what depending on what county you live in, depending on what school district you're serving, there's variance in our tax structure, even in our state. So there's an interactive calculator in their dashboard that you can put in your variables and using our formula, see what you put in and what you get out. But the purpose was to really highlight how fortunate we are from our legacy industries and how giving they are to our economy and how dependent we are on them. And for the average Cowboy Joe to understand, I hope that's not trademarked, but
not on this podcast.
Not on this podcast, because we didn't call it the Cowboy Joe family, the Cowboy family.
Cowboy family.
The average Joe, how lucky each of us are that we have most of our services paid for. And since we have a severance tax, we don't have to have an income tax in the state. And that makes it a great place to thrive and live, work, play. The thing about that's interesting about this project is we used all mean information. So we used the outlier housing costs in Teton County versus Albany County, where it might be a little bit more affordable. And we came up with a number of a mean home being valued at $370,000. We decided that, traditionally now both parents are working. If you're in a traditional home, $125,000 being the baseline of your salary. Now, if you make more than that, again, you can go into our interactive dashboard and play with that number and see what it spits out. But then we put 2 kids in, and basically what it spit out was the average family of 4 is paying $4,429.08 in taxes and gaining $61,263.44 back in services through K-12 education, state services, special districts, city, town, county services back. So
that's great. Yeah, I would encourage everyone. So this model is available on the WTA website.
wyotax.org, and you'll just see the Cowboy family right at the top.
Perfect. I went and run it. It took me less than a minute to get it set up, where I learned that I pay less than 10%. I pay for less than 10%, or my family does, of the services we receive in Wyoming. And of course, we have 3 kiddos in the K through 12 system. So, that makes us more on the taker side. But I think we all understand we benefit hugely from living in Wyoming in a way that we're not paying for all the services we receive. And I think it's very eye-opening when we talk about tax reform. So really appreciate that. Okay, so Dawson, how did you develop this project, and talk about the work you did to get this from a vision and an idea to reality?
Sure. Yeah. So developing this project, it definitely had its challenges. But as Ashley said, we had some other states and some reports that were very similar to what we were trying to do with the Cowboy family, specifically Utah and Idaho. They had their own versions of it that were pretty similar, and that helped get the ball rolling. The biggest difference between those reports and ours is that the Cowboy family looked at the taxes paid side, but also the services received side. And we hadn't been able to find any other state that had done a report like this that included the service piece as well, which we thought was super important to include, just to paint the full picture for the Wyoming taxpayer. So yeah, after we got the ball rolling, though, it was really about mapping out the methodology and just finding the most sound data that we could that gave the most accurate results. We used data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. Census Bureau, and the countless state entities that provide us tax data within the state. And also the advisors on this project, Dr. Godby from the UW Department of Economics, Dr. Liu from the Wyoming Economic Analysis Division, and the retired director of the Department of Revenue, Dan Noble, as I said, were instrumental in helping decide the methodology of this project and really helping overcome a lot of the roadblocks that we encountered, which there were a lot because we were reinventing the wheel on a lot of this methodology. But I think at the end of the day, we found that the data was sound and we were confident in the results of the research. So,
yeah, like I said, it's a great tool. And one of the most interesting aspects of the Cowboy family and the work you've all done is the interactive dashboard that is available on the website. So, Ashley, tell us more about the tool and how our listeners can use it.
So again, you can go on and put in your variable data. If you're single, if you are jointly married or jointly share a home with someone, if you have children, what your gross income is, what your home value's worth, and then how many vehicles you drive, and then their fuel efficiency, because we have to calculate the fuel tax. Now, just to be clear, we don't capture this data. It forgets it as soon as it spits it out. But it could be a single person living in, a different county. It's going to be different for every county that you live in, but you really can't break this model. You're going to reap more than you sow. So if you're not leveraging the K-12 education system, even though you're paying into it through your property tax, you're still reaping more than you sow. Now, those with lots of children are getting tons of services back clearly, while they're in the throes of it. But that's part of the society that we decided to choose to be a part of. And per our Constitution, our property tax has to go to K-12 education. So that is part of the formula.
Great. So I'm just curious, is there anyone in Wyoming who pays for all the services they get?
No.
No. No one?
No.
Not one person?
No.
Not someone in Teton County?
Potentially they could break the model, but...
By break the model, you mean they actually pay for at least all the services they get. So potentially there's someone. There's someone.
Maybe. That's a good question. We might have to...
But in all fairness, what we should understand is we are getting a really good deal in the state, and that it is on the backs of largely our energy, minerals, and extractive industry.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some outliers out there, right?
We'll find those people.
Right. So yeah, challenge to the listener to go break the model.
No, don't do that. But for in general, I mean, for the vast majority, maybe future student worker assignment to find that guy who's not paying his full share, his or her full share. But really, we understand we're getting a great deal in Wyoming. Okay, Dawson, what do you find most interesting about the dashboard, or what was the most fun to create it?
The most fun thing? Well, first of all, I built it in Excel, which I'm an Excel nerd for sure. So that was really fun. What I was really going to talk about, though, is kind of what Ashley talked about, and I feel like it's beating a dead horse.
Okay.
Just that it's really it just shows that the Wyoming taxpayer gets a great return on their taxpayer dollar.
Perfect.
Holly, if you don't mind, I did break the model. In Teton County, if you have a home, and I don't know where that threshold is, but about $10 million, you will pay a little bit more in than you receive back in services with no kids in K-12 education.
Okay, so there might be a couple.
So there's extreme outliers that will break it, but I would say 95% of our population cannot break this model.
I'm guessing it's even more than 95% if that's the criteria. So
phase 2.
Yeah. Okay. So really appreciate all this insight. Ashley, where do you see the WTA going in the future, both short-term and long-term vision and goals for the organization?
Sure. The work is never done because unfortunately, like I said earlier, 2 things in life are certain: you die and you pay taxes. So taxes is always a big conversation. In the short term, the legislature is going to really focus on sales tax and broadening the base. I think they're going to take up that topic of tangible personal property and what the right size around the assessment of that is. Residential property tax is far from over. I think that will continue to be a hot topic. Our dependence on severance tax continues to be a hot topic. You know, we helped with the lowering of Cole's severance tax. I think there'll be a continuation of those conversations. So lots of work still to do in the legislature, short and long term. I'm about to be on the road here with the Cowboy family talking about that and helping educate just citizens understanding where the revenues come from. And I think from this project, like I just said, phase 2, there's going to be lots of phase 2, 3, 4, 5 from this project. I feel like we were just sitting in Scott's office looking at the impact of the Trona expansion and their revenues that could potentially come in. I mean, the list is endless. Every spring I get together with my board and we flush out all the research topics that we want to dive into. We figure out what's going to be most relevant for the now and the legislature and helping them understand the data that they're working in. We pride ourselves in taking information from a lot of spots and trying to condense it and make it manageable to maneuver around and get to an informed decision. So it's always a driving factor of what the soup du jour of the political interest is in, is where we try to go through. But we will always be advocating for sound tax policy in the long term. Want to keep continuing to work with University of Wyoming, how we can leverage internships and economists to help us understand the data and present it in an easy way to understand. But I don't know, Dawson might have some, especially since he was the one scraping the data, showcasing of what we do and how we do it best, of taking it from all sorts of different places and putting it into one spot.
Right. Yeah. I feel that, I guess, just compiling data from all the state agencies and comparing it to federal data as well is a pretty big challenge, especially with a project like this where you want all of the data to make sense in, I don't know.
That's perfect.
And easy to understand.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Let's ask our last question. So first of all, I just want to thank both of you. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I've been lucky enough to be part of the energy industry my whole career. Unfortunately, that means I've moved a bit, and this is my third state to live in since I graduated from college. I've never seen this level of transparency, and maybe part of it is just the smallness of the Wyoming population that I've gotten to hear you, Ashley, talk about this, and Dawson, I've gotten, because of that, to go look at this incredible tool that you and your colleague helped build. And I think it really makes you think hard about the state's future, where we should invest, and the role here at the School of Energy Resources. It really reinforces that for me, but also what we should be looking at, right? And what's going to produce that revenue. And I just want to thank you for all that hard work, because it's definitely not, you don't have this level of transparency everywhere. You know, people complain about taxes sometimes because they don't really understand where it's going, or, you know, how much they're paying in versus what they're getting. And I think that your tool really helps kind of alleviate some of those concerns. So Thank you so much for all your hard work. So a last question, just so our listeners can learn a little bit more about you. So Ashley, what's your favorite place to visit in Wyoming?
So Wyoming is one main street with long drives between all the towns. So my favorite place is wherever I'm at.
Oh.
So right now it's Laramie.
Awesome.
I love being here on game day, but
Laramie.
I also love Du Bois and snowmobiling, and I love Centennial and snowmobiling, and I love being up in Cody and all that it has to offer, and, you know, the greater Yellowstone Basin, and then of course Southwest Wyoming and all the jewels we have down there. Between it's all outdoor rec focused, I guess.
Okay, this is a cheater answer.
Yeah.
You can't just list the whole state.
Right.
So this is my favorite place.
My
My favorite place in Wyoming is to visit is Wyoming.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, wherever I'm at.
Dawson, can you be more specific?
I will be more specific. So I grew up in Meeteetse, the small town of Meeteetse. I think population 327 is what it is. And I think that's hands down my favorite still. It's hard to beat the greater Yellowstone region, being an outdoors and fishing guy. So
perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for all you do. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.